This next segment is clarity about how governments promote shame, shyness, and fear. I just had mentioned complacency in the previous segment, and I want to just comment on that. When people are taught not to be afraid of something that's familiar, that's what I mean by complacency. When they're programmed to perceive something as safe just because it's familiar, that's complacency. It may actually be dangerous, but if people never make their own independent assessment of it and really never think it through, then they can presume something is safe, such as governments, which are in fact quite dangerous. Some governments are in fact extremely dangerous, and that's their design. That's why they're valuable. If they weren't dangerous, then that would be potentially ineffective in terms of governing the masses. So, governments promote shame, shyness, and fear. Here's a little bit about how they do that. There's a culture of the suppression of fear. So, like the shaming of fear. People shouldn't be afraid. That's I don't know how universal that is throughout the world and throughout the last few centuries, but in the last 100 years, many times the phrase "there's nothing to fear but fear itself" has been used in the U.S. very widely, and like this is, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Well, no, actually it doesn't make much sense, but we'll get to that in a moment. So there's a culture of the suppression of fear. The fear of fear itself, of course, is really ironic. It's paranoia. So why would governments want to suppress fear and the accurate assessment of danger? Again, maybe because they're the pinnacles of danger in our modern human life. Governments are operations of organized violence, which can dramatically, and these operations of organized violence can dramatically increase the efficiency, the effectiveness of their operations of terror through propaganda and indoctrination. So if people have mythology about governments, then that can make the governments more effective in producing compliance, complacency, loyalty, etc. So if the governments can merely threaten social ostracizing, and just by that threat can produce conformity and compliance and behavioral precision, regularity, because that's what governments do, is they regulate behavior, people. So if just the threat of social ostracizing can produce conformity, then the actual frequency of the uses of incarceration and violence against civilians can be dramatically reduced, and you can still have really high rates of stability for that government, even without them doing a lot of violence and a lot of incarceration, which, of course, when you send out armed soldiers to take someone by force and put them into confinement. So should we protest that governments are violent, or that they systematically use propaganda to deceive, to distract, and to promote confusion, as like predators? For what purpose would we protest? Those who fear social ostracizing will predictably make some heroic display of contempt for certain governments, right? I want to just demonstrate to my peers that I am loyal to the ideals that have been installed in me by the government. So how do I do that? Well, I protest bad governments, whether those are foreign governments, enemies, thousands of miles away or hundreds of miles away or next county over or whatever, or even our own traitorous leaders, so-called traitorous leaders. So people who are really concerned about other people's opinions and social ostracizing, they're really afraid of being outcasts, right? Then they will make heroic displays that aren't heroic at all, but as if they're heroic displays of contempt for our own traitorous leaders, whether that's the mayor or the city council or the whatever level of governing officer, or it may not even be a governing officer. Maybe there's contempt for the horrible people at that media company, that TV. So after these zealous super patriot people displayed their condemnation, and then they received congratulations from all those who also think of their display of contempt as heroic, well, then what? So I display my contempt. Everybody pats me on the back or claps for me, and then we all do it together. And then what? Then nothing. Clarity about authentic courage. So that's all based on conforming to an ideal. Notice I just said conforming to an ideal. So there's an installed ideal, and then people conform to it in their behavior. That's not authentic courage. That's operating based on fear of being viewed as an outcast. So it's like overzealously or very zealously, passionately displaying my loyalty to some ideal, which is typically installed by a governing institution, whether that's a church or a government, or I guess those are the two major ones. That's not authentic courage, like from my own inspiration. So the details of the operations of governments is simply a fact. Either they use violence or not, either they use deception or not. I'm saying they all use violence, they all use deception, just a fact. They all mislead the masses by the programming of perception through institutions like public schools and through the mainstream media, which is regulated by governments or even operated by governments. So that is the methodology, or one methodology, of governments influencing the ideals and the perceptions and the values of the general public. Governments are all violent, and it is quite functional for civilians to accurately assess the ability and willingness of governments to use violence. However, it is quite effective for governments to terrify this promotion of shyness and shame and just, being super reserved, especially about criticisms of government. Or when I say criticism, I just mean telling it like it is about governments, that they're violent and deceptive. It's not actually a criticism when I say it. I'm just stating it as a fact. But for many people, they're very shy of just saying it plainly as a fact, because they anticipate they might, be targeted by friends, or by, I don't know. I don't think that the CIA or any other government is really concerned if I say, hey, you know what? I just noticed governments are violent and deceptive. They have no concern whatsoever for people saying that. So fear is targeted as a great evil. There's a culture which shames anyone who displays fear. As I mentioned, U.S. presidents have famously promoted paranoia by saying the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. That's like saying your assessments of fear are wrong. Like, you shouldn't have them. You shouldn't have fear. You shouldn't perceive danger. You shouldn't have the ability to distinguish between danger and safety. The only thing we have to fear is the ability to distinguish between danger and safety. That's some dumb crap, right? But when stated by that authority figure in that witchcraft priesthood kind of, mass assembly, the masses, and they watch it on TV and so forth, the masses really take that in. It affects people, and it's being said when there's this big crowd of folks all at once too. So the only thing we have to fear, we're trained, is the ability to distinguish between danger and safety. That's some really mental illness promotion kind of stuff. So the fear of fear is also known as paranoia. That's what I'm calling it. And it's obviously hypocritical, ironic, but in a state of sufficient terror that they may be targeted for social ostracizing, the masses will routinely suppress their own expression of fear, whether that's kindergartners, nursery schoolers, soldiers in boot camp, whatever. Displaying fear is not part of the program. There's actually a program to inhibit the display of fear. So if you have kids crying in kindergarten, well, that doesn't work that distracts the other students. Hey, you're not getting along as a team with the other kids. You got to get along with the other kids good, right? Or if in boot camp you're saying, wow, I'm really scared of the sergeant. If you say, wow, I'm really scared of the sergeant, everybody goes like, hell yeah, you are, and you should be. But at some point, if people, display ongoingly beyond a certain level, then they will have their displays of fear suppressed. And that's part of the system. So the masses are taught to suppress their own expression of fear, even pretending not to experience it, because they perceive that expressing it will be actually dangerous. They'll be targeted and outcast or yelled at by the drill sergeant or whatever. They may even just deny fear. So they want to suppress the expression of fear, not display it, not even be numb to it, really. We want to have it be sincere. When people make the denial, have it be sincere. So they're completely numb to the ability to assess danger or safety. And then they're really compliant, they're really complacent, they're totally shy when it comes to making independent assessments of things. They're very dependent on the authority, the drill sergeant, the teacher, whatever it is. You're just kind of, people are just freaked out. They get, they follow along. Whatever the course leader says, you go along with. Why? Because you're scared. All right. So this leads to virtually everyone experiencing shyness, like growing levels of shyness, and yet virtually no one daring to admit it. At least not to the group, in the group context. And all these, we're talking about group context, boot camp, kindergarten, these are group settings. Certainly there can be one-on-one settings in which people are taught to suppress displays of fear. The thing I think of there is like a psychiatric session where a counselor says, or a psychiatrist says, hey, you know what? You seem like you have a lot of anxiety. You know what we should really do? Instead of remove you from danger, what we should do is give you some drugs to suppress your body's response to danger so that you're numb. That's the typical modern response, as far as I know. I'm not making this based on extensive research, but that's my sense of it. Is that there's your immune system's responding? Well, must be something wrong with your immune system. Let's turn it off. Here, take these drugs. It's going to cost you, this much, and you're going to have to do it for the rest of your life. It's going to have these side effects, and if you try and get off them, you're going to go into some serious withdrawal. But that's all the better for our cash flow. So let's see. Virtually everyone experiences degrees of shyness, extreme or moderate, and yet virtually no one dares to admit it. So everyone inaccurately perceives themselves to be unusual, shameful, and disloyal. They have disloyal thoughts. Oh, I'm not supposed to be scared of the teacher. I'm supposed to like the teacher. Okay, I'll smile. Good. This looks like a real smile, right? Does that look like a real smile? I'll practice, but I'll go home, I'll get in the mirror, and I'll practice it. I'll make my speech smiling. It'll be a fake smile, but it'll work. I'm going to get an A. All right. So it's not disloyal to be afraid of the violence of governments. That's intelligent. It is simply a precise assessment of danger, whether it's the teacher's ability to punish and reward, or the drill sergeant, or I'm going to say U.S. Army, but the U.S. Army comes into the native reservation or to the occupied territory and says, look, here are the new rules. You have a curfew at 8 p.m., you're in, or we shoot you. Well, you want to be aware of whether it's 8 p.m. or not, because those people are serious. When they make those kind of threats, they're probably serious. And if they shoot you at 7:50 and go, well, we'll wait 10 minutes to write the report, these are really powerful groups. We're talking about huge imbalances of power. So you want to be sensitive to not only the specific statements made by the bullies, so to speak, but the dynamic that they have the power. They have the capacity to use, immense amounts of violence in very concentrated ways. So fear by itself does not result in rebellion or contempt. If one is afraid of governments, that doesn't result in rebellion or contempt. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Real fear would result in a healthy respect. So if there's people with, guns over here and people with wild dogs over, or a bunch of wild dogs over there, not people, just wild dogs, and there's some sharks over there. Well, I want to know that, and I don't want to go in any of those three directions. I'm going to go that way. I'm going to go, wow, unless those are groups that I have some, loyalty and allegiance with, and I think I'm going to be safe with the sharks because I'm one of them. Well, then I want to, be aware of danger and move away from it, unless I'm actually benefited from it, like because I'm in an allegiance with it. I'm the chief of police, and all these other squad car, level foot patrol officers are doing what I tell them to do. Well, in that case, I may be like all the more attracted to be in the midst of the army, the whatever group of armed soldiers. So when there is a fear from an accurate assessment of danger, and yet one takes action anyway, that's courage. So this section was clarity about authentic courage. That's what authentic courage would be. An accurate assessment of danger, and an action that one knows involves risk. That's courage, authentic courage. All right. Life after shyness is the next segment. This is kind of long, I know. Life after shyness is the next segment. Let's see what that has to say.